Hi AP. Okay, so in today's video, we're going to continue to talk and work on the free response question number 7 on the AP theory exam involving harmonizing melodies. This is another example. This is example number 2. First thing you're going to want to do is look at the key signature right away. And you see that we have G major. So if you need to, on a need basis only, you could, on scrap paper, supply the chords and the spelling of them so we know quickly what we can use and which tones are perhaps common. So I'm doing a quick guide here at the bottom. Recall that we don't need to deal with the 7 chord or the 3 chord. So I'm going to quickly just fill all this in for my reference. And again, you're only doing this if you need to because this part of the exam, this is timed. Okay. Now that I have that as a reference, what I want to do next is scan through the given information that they have here. Note the scale degree numbers, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 7, and so on, will not be part of the AP theory exam. That is something you can write in on scrap paper if that will help you to identify the chord progression. Next up, I want to look at the cadence points, and remember, you're going to start working on the cadences backwards. So we'll start with this one first, which, if you recall, should be a perfect authentic cadence. Then we can harmonize this cadence in measure 6, number 2, and then we can harmonize this cadence here in measure 4. Before we even do that, a couple things are jumping out to me that I see here. In measure 3, this is the given information that they have provided. I'm going to put a star on beat 3. I noticed that they've harmonized beat 3 of measure 3 with a 5 chord. That's an indicator that the B in the soprano that's circled is functioning as an accented passing tone. So the B is a non-chord tone. It's the A that actually goes with the 5 chord. Another thing I notice in measure 6, and I'll put a star right here on beat 2 in measure 6, is that they have the use of Phi, which is the raised 4th scale degree. That's going to require a chord outside of G major. So there's our secondary dominant. And I also noticed that in measure 7 on beat 1, we have a return to C natural, which simply implies the return to the diatonic 4th scale degree. Now that I've done that, I've scanned my material, I've identified my cadence points, I'm going to work backwards. What I'd like you to do right now is take some time to harmonize the cadences, working from the end and going backwards. Good luck, AP. Okay, AP, what I'm going to do is show you my solutions to the cadences. Remember, I'm working backwards, so I'm going to start with the last measure, and I'm actually going to erase this box. What we don't want to do is write extra things on our paper. On scrap paper, fine, but on the final project, we only really want to notate the base line with the stems down and provide the Roman numeral analysis. Okay, so in the last measure, I know I need a PAC. I'll write that for now just as a reminder. PAC is sol, do in the bass, which means my last two chords must be 5 to 1. In the key of G major, that is D to G, like so. The note before the 5 chord in the soprano is an A, which is a re. If you need to, look at your chord stack and see where A falls. A falls in the 2 chord. A falls in the 5 chord. That should be D, F, A. Right there. Rather than make it 5, 5, 1, which I certainly could do, I can make it more interesting by providing a more of a harmonic progression, the circle progression. Remember 4, 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. So 2 likes to go before 5, and I like to write 2 in first inversion, so maybe I can make a 2, 6 there. If I did that, then I would have to put this C in the bass. Therefore, the bass is singing in the key of G major, Fa, Sol, Do, which makes for a nice, perfect, authentic cadence. So that's what I chose to do there. I'm going to erase the information that is not needed and not required. And now I'm going to head over to the secondary dominant cadence. I'm going to erase this. And I want to start here on beat 1. I have a B in the soprano. So B is found in the tonic chord. So for now, what I'll do is this. And I'll call this 1. Then we have that raised 4th scale degree, which is Phi, which is going to act like a leading tone of a new tonic, and it goes to the new tonic, which is D. D is 5 in the key of G, so I'm going to put my Roman numeral 5 there. So I've done the first chord and the third chord of that measure. The 5 chord in the bass in root position would be a D. Now I need the middle chord. That's where our secondary dominant is. So it looks like we have a 5 of 5. In which case, the bass note would be an A, because that's going to be an A, C sharp, E. And that's how I would analyze that particular cadence. Now, if we head on up towards the 4th measure, let me erase this. We have our fermata here. Actually, let me just go back 1 minute to the secondary dominant cadence and realize that this is a half cadence. Your secondary dominant cadence is going to be a half cadence. Okay, let's head back up to measure 4. The soprano is singing Re, Do, Ti, or scale degree 2, 1, 7. 7 is an indicator that this is going to be a half cadence we need to write. Half cadences should end on 5 in root position. So therefore, I would have a D, make it a half note, and I would call that 5. Before that, we have soprano singing tonic. So what if I made that a 1 chord? We're going to keep it nice and simple, like that. Now, before that, I have the soprano singing an A, which is a re. We can look at the chord stack and we can see where A falls. A falls in the 2 chord. A falls in the 5 chord. So I think rather than do the 2 chord, I'm going to use the 5 chord, because 5 to 1 is better than 2 to 1. But it's still a little boring to me because it's just 5, 1, 5, which means the bass is going to be singing D, G, D. So what if I inverted this 5 and made it a 5, 6? Which means that the bass would be singing an F sharp, which would also make for a smoother bass line. So I think I'm going to leave it as that. We have a 5-6 going to a 1, going to a half cadence, 5 in root position. I like that progression. Also, you can begin to see that I'm trying to use contrary motion as much as possible. My PAC has contrary motion in the last measure, and my 5-6 to the 1, the half cadence that we just did in measure 4, has contrary motion as well. So I'm trying my best to do that to avoid parallel motion. Okay, so I am done with the cadence points. What's next? Well, you're going to want to start with tonic, or the 1 chord if possible, and then decide on the harmonic rhythm. So this is the part of the process that establishes what notes are to be harmonized and what notes are to be considered non-chord tones. Remember, it is not necessary to harmonize every beat, and do not harmonize every note when eighth notes are added to the melody. So look at measure 5, for example. There's eighth notes in the melody. You don't have to harmonize. You don't have to have 5 Roman numerals in that measure. Now look at measure 7, that begins with the C natural. Consider making the B, which I'll circle, a non-chord tone. It's not necessary to harmonize that. You really only need 2 or 3 chords per measure. Okay, so you have liberty here. Use contrary motion wherever possible. Another reminder, do not use non-chord tones in the bass line. And when you are in doubt, list the 3 or sometimes 4 choices for possible harmonization. Or you can refer to your chord stack on your scrap paper. Okay, so that's the next step. Then, step 3 would be to fill in the beats between the cadences. Remember that each phrase is like starting at the beginning. So if you look carefully here, at the end of the second phrase, we have a half cadence. That's measure 4. So the phrase is over. So measure 5 begins an entirely new phrase. In other words, we don't have to resolve that 5 chord appropriately because it's the end of a phrase. Okay, when you are done with this, you should triple check your work. Ask yourself this question: is there contrary motion between the bass and the soprano? Hopefully, the majority of it is yes, there is contrary motion. Then you're going to want to check for parallelism. That's where you go through each interval between the bass and the soprano for every chord, and you check to see if the intervals are consonant. And remember, if you have 2 8s or 2 5s in a row, then you might have parallel motion that's illegal, which you'll need to address and fix. Ask yourself if the progression follows the tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic progression, right? In other words, like 1, 4, 5, 1, or 1, 2, 5, 1. Those are progressions. Think of the 4, 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1 circle of fifths progression or circle of fourths progression. Okay, think if you have written a 5 to a 1 or a 5 to a 6 or used a 7th chord in any inversion. Do the tendency tones resolve? And remember, you only really want to use 7th chords at cadences. So we're done with the cadences and we don't have any 7th chords. We kept it very simple. Also, double check that your cadences end only with either 1, 5, or 6 at the fermatas. And in each case, they end appropriately. And in root position, which is very important. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to work on this, and then we'll check our solutions and share them with each other. Good luck, AP. AP, I'm going to give you 5 more minutes to harmonize this melody. Just a couple of reminders. Make sure to try to use contrary motion whenever possible. And if you're done, double check to make sure that you have all your Roman numerals in place and any necessary Arabic numbers as well. Lastly, please make sure that you double check each interval between the bass and the soprano to make sure that they are consonant intervals. Okay, 5 more minutes. Okay, AP, I'm going to talk through my solution. So remember that the next step is going to be to start at the tonic points if possible. So if I look right where it says start here, that's a tonic point. The soprano is singing do. So I can make that a 1 chord, which I will do right now. And I can label it a capital 1. So that's what I did there. Now, if I look at measure 5, I have to complete that measure. Now, what I chose to do here was make 3 Roman numerals. The first beat I kept actually over the course of 2 beats, and I called that the 1 chord, because here the soprano is singing G to B, which is part of this tonic chord. So there's my first Roman numeral. Here I called this B that I'm circling a non-chord tone, right? That's an unaccented passing tone. And in the last beat I have an A, which I realized could fit in the 5 chord, or it could fit in the 2 chord. But 2 is not the best choice because 2 doesn't like to go to 1 as much as 5 does. So I called this a 5, and I actually put it in inversion and made it 5-6 with the F sharp and the bass. Why did I do that? Because if you think about it, it's T to do, which we already completed when we did the cadence points. And I also harmonized the C right here in the soprano, and I called this a 4-6 of 6. I realized that the C was in the 4 chord. The C is also in the 2 chord. You could have certainly put the 2 chord there if you wanted to, but I chose the 4-6. So in that measure I have the 1 chord to the 4-6 chord to the 5-6 chord. Now, let's move on. After the cadence in measure 5, the last beat, I have a B in the soprano. That's part of the tonic chord. I can keep it simple, like this. And I can call that 1. Now in the next measure, measure 7, I have a C natural. C natural is part of the 4 chord. It's also part of the 2 chord. Remember that 1 can travel anywhere. So I could put a 2 chord there, and I can call this A right here. And what I decided to do was make that a half note, because I decided to make this B a non-chord tone. And then here on beat 3, I put a 5. Since I already have the 2, I put a 5. And then I put a little deceptive motion here in the middle of this phrase. I went from 5 to 6. I could have gone to tonic, but I made it more interesting. So I went from 5 to 6. So here's D to E. If you look carefully at my progression right here, you'll see, and I'll highlight it, you see that I used the circle progression. 6-2-5-1 right here. It works very, very nicely. 2 loves to go to 5 as well. So now what I want to do is erase anything that is not the bass note and the Roman numeral analysis. So I'm going to erase what I circled here in the soprano. Erase T do, I don't need that. Erase this non-chord tone I've labeled. I'm also going to go down here and erase my chord stack. So I'm left with just the solution. And this is what your final answer would look like. Now, one thing I still have to do, that I have to make sure to do, is to go back and from where it says start here to to the end, and I'm going to make sure that all of the intervals are consonant and that I have no parallel motion. So let's quickly take care of this. So we have 8, 3, 6, 3. So far so good. 8. That's a 6. 3, 3. 2 3s in a row are fine, right? Because you can have parallel thirds. Then I have a third again, that's fine. I have the octave, 8, to 3, to 3, to 5, to 3, to 6, to 3, to 8. Notice that there's no 7, there's no dissonant because I have no 7th chords in this particular harmonization. And I don't have 2 8s in a row or 2 5s in a row, so I really don't have any illegal parallel motion. Now I want to make sure I erase that. If you can do that without writing anything in, that's great. If you need to write stuff in, write it lightly so then you can erase it. So we're left with just the final solution, which is this. Just a couple of more points to recognize in my harmonization of this melody. If you look at the bass line, it's okay to have the bass line jump around once in a while, but you don't want them to jump around a lot. So that's one of the reasons why I decided to use some chords in inversion, right? For example, in the first line, the last measure, we have the 5 6 to the 1. So that makes it more interesting, and it makes it smoother for the basses to sing. Also, in measure 5, right, we have the 4 6 going to the 5 6. That's stepwise motion for the bass, rather than put those in root position. Also, if you look carefully at the bass line against the soprano, you can see that there are many places where I used contrary motion, which is also probably the best, arguably the best type of motion. So now we're going to check your solutions and see what you came up with, and hopefully you kept it simple for success, yet creative at the same time. Thanks for watching, AP.